All right, welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to History 102 at JMU, summer 2025, for the adult degree program. I am Joe Wilson. I believe I have everything working correctly. I have a new computer now, headset and mic. I think I've got everything working correctly. So hopefully everything goes right for our video today. On the interwar period, we are also in the section of the course where both of my classes are beginning. So I am halfway through the course in the first course, and the second course is starting. So if you are in the first course, the first half, we are beginning after midterm. If you are in the second portion of the class, you have just begun the course temporarily where I am at and are just now catching up to where I have been recording the lectures. Ooh, isn't time an interesting thing? So, yes, it's June 20th, just before the second 8-week course begins. But that's what I'm dealing with, teaching these two sections at the same time. Also, I've been driving a van for the Girl Scouts. But you did not sign up for this course to hear about my issues. Oh, no, no, no. You signed up to learn something, to get something out of it. In particular, if you're in the adult degree program, you have to take the praxis. And a student in the first 8-week session sent me an email that broke down what you're supposed to learn or you will be tested on um, concerning the history portion. Half of it is U.S. history and civics. We don't really cover that in this course. We do talk about certain aspects of U.S. history as it relates to the global past, how the U.S. interacted in the global stage, but we don't talk about the details of the American Revolution. We don't talk about the Civil War and everything that led up to it. Even though I do talk about the Civil War in the context of the global past of the other things going on around the world during that period and how it relates. So you'll have to lean on other U.S. history course for those things. This course will help you with the second half of what that is going to test you on concerning world history, the 20th century. So, what we're getting into here now will help you on the praxis test. It looks like it's going to cover from the First World War through the end of the Cold War. Well, that's what we focus on in the second half of this class, the very recent global past. The first half of the class focuses on the early modern period and the long 19th century. It doesn't look like they test you on that. In fact, it doesn't look like they even test you on any of what in the West we call the Middle Ages. But in global terms, we call it the post classical period. It looks like it will test you on the Bronze Age, or starting around 3500 BC up to the end of the classical period, which ends around AD 500. Well, we don't talk about that. That's 101, the first part of this. This is 102. We don't do that. That's far beyond the reach of what we talk about in this class. So I don't know if they offer a 101 section in the adult degree program or not, but that's what you need to take to learn that. That's my favorite course to teach is 101. I get to talk about fun things like Buddha and Confucius and Lao Tzu and Jesus and Muhammad and those sorts of things. They all live in that period. But let's not linger on things that are not part of what we're doing. Excuse me. Let's get back to the end of the First World War. We talked about the Russian Revolution in the last lecture, which occurs during the First World War. Let me say a few more things about it. When the Russian Revolution is occurring, the other powers of the world who are fighting in this war will send military forces to help the white factions in the Civil War to help put down the Red Revolution, much like the French Revolution. You will see outside countries say, we don't want that to happen here. We don't want to see our monarchs killed and society upended like happened in the French Revolution. They don't want the Russian Revolution to spread to their countries in 1848, as many of you wrote about in your first essay. The impact of the Communist Manifesto sparked revolutions all over Europe. Communism is seen as a threat to the status quo. Lenin created a dictatorship of the proletariat. His vision, he pushed it through with violence, revolution, and civil war. He created it. His movement. Well, the ruling classes surrounding in Europe look at it and say, good God, could that happen here? And they don't want that. The ruling classes very much want to stay in power. So at the end of the war, all of the diplomats and leaders of the victorious nations, the Triple Entente, the Alliance, Great Britain, the United States, France, the Big Three, they're going to call the peace conference the palace again, the Palace of Versailles outside Paris. 32 nations are going to come. None of the defeated nations are represented. Not Germany, not Austria Hungary, not Turkey. Germany carries the blame for the war. They are seen as the bloodthirsty Hun, that they declared war, they ravaged Belgium, marching through it, that they imposed all these terrible terms on Russia and took far more than they deserved in that peace treaty. We're going to make them pay. Representing France is Georges Clemenceau. Representing Great Britain is their Prime Minister, David Lloyd George. And representing the United States is our Democrat president, Woodrow Wilson. Now, he is the odd Democrat out of a long succession of Republicans that had been in power since Abraham Lincoln. Woodrow Wilson believes himself to be a rather high minded individual. He had been the president of Princeton University prior to being elected president of the United States. He believed in a peaceful cooperation of nations out of the peace treaty, and particularly believed that the causes of the war were a lack of self determination for the multi ethnic populations of Eastern Europe. And he very much wanted that new nations be born out of this treaty that had their own rights to national self determination. Georges Clemenceau wanted the Germans to pay. His country was absolutely devastated. Their countrysides and cities were destroyed. It would take them years and years to rehabilitate their land that had been utterly destroyed by this industrial war. David Lloyd George is looking at the terms that are being discussed. He says, yes, Germany should be punished, but if we try to vindicate ourselves and paint them as the villains and extract too much of a penalty upon them, we are only causing another war. The Versailles Treaty is not the only treaty that ends this. This is the treaty with Germany, but there are other treaties. Let's look at them. Let's see what happens. In the Treaty of Versailles, the Germans officially must accept the blame for starting and prosecuting this war. They must pay to the Allies monetary reparations for damage and loss of life and to infrastructure. They will be restricted to an army of no more than 100,000 soldiers, a very small navy, no submarines, no air force. Coming into the First World War, I failed to point out, but if you looked at the slide, you may have noticed, or looked at the slides closely, you may have noticed the Germans had the largest army going into this war, listed at 8 million men strong. How is it that they were able to sustain such a large standing army? Because all of the young men in Germany, all of the middle aged men in Germany were in the reserves. It was part of the Prussian system that all young men went through initial military training. And if they were not in the army, they could be called up quickly into the army from a vast and deep reserve system. Now, by the limitations of the Treaty of Versailles, they are hamstrung. They must give up territory within Europe. They lose parts of the heartland of Prussia that will become Poland, and areas that the Russians gave up to the Germans will become parts of Poland as Poland is reestablished as an independent kingdom again. They will lose Alsace Lorraine that they took from the French in the Franco Prussian War. They will also have a demilitarized borderland, a buffer zone in the Rhineland where they are not allowed to keep any military at all. Helps to satisfy the French that they will not be invaded again. Germany loses all of its overseas colonies. They will go to the English and to the French. All of their Pacific holdings will go to the Japanese. The League of Nations will come out of this, and Germany will not be allowed in. The United States will not join the League of Nations. The reason for this is purely political within the United States. As I said, Woodrow Wilson is a Democrat. The Republicans hold a majority in the Congress. And they say, you did not consult us on joining this treaty organization, therefore, we will not approve it. and it's more of a Democrat versus Republican thing than actual international politics. How do the German public, the citizenry, how do they react to the Treaty of Versailles? They look around at one another as the soldiers are coming home from the battlefield and the Kaiser has abdicated and there is emerging chaos. They say, where are the foreign soldiers? Where are the foreign armies that have conquered us? Our soldiers surrendered on the battlefield, but that battlefield was in France. We have not been invaded. We have not been conquered. We have not been occupied. How is it that we have lost this war? You see, that's what it meant to lose a war up till now. But now their soldiers surrendered and went home. They'd had enough. And by the terms of the treaty, they've lost 10% of their land in Europe that held an eighth of their population. They've lost all their overseas colonies. They've lost Alsace Lorraine, which was heavily industrialized. They can't pay back these reparations. The people say, how is it that we have lost this war? And chaos erupts throughout the country. Who's the government if it's not the Kaiser? So these soldiers coming back become a de facto police force trying to restore some sense of order. A socialist government comes to power that signs this treaty. We'll see radicals rising on both sides. Very early in the 20s, they fall behind on their payments. Well, what do? They start printing money. You want this much money? Well, let's print it up and pay you with it. Well, what are we learning about economics and currency and supply and demand? If you don't have anything to back that up, gold or silver or something, and you have created a huge supply of money, is it worth anything? This creates hyperinflation. The famous pictures of Germans with wheelbarrows full of cash that are worthless. And the Germans blame this treaty for all of their problems. And even so, the French think it's not harsh enough. Like I said, the Senate will not adopt the League of Nations and we will not join it. Austria, Austria-Hungary is no more. They break up into the nations of Austria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia, where we're going to see Bosnians and Serbians and Herzegovinians and Albanians, all sorts of ethnicities squeezed into one Yugoslavia. And look who's pushed into it but formerly independent Serbia. My goodness, what a interesting little powder keg we've created there. So the Treaty of Saint Germain does give the Czechs and the Slovaks estate, the Hungarians and the Austrians estate, but now a super state of multi ethnic peoples. Well, let's hope they get along. Now, the Ottoman Empire is also no more. The Austro Hungarian Empire goes away. The Ottoman Empire goes away. Mustafa Kemal, as I mentioned earlier, had led the defense of the Gallipoli campaign that the British initiated. He will become a leader, a political leader, and will be renamed Ataturk, the father of the Turks. He will reject the initial terms given to him by the Allies. He will give away almost all of the Middle East, but he will demand that they retain the rights over the Dardanelles and the Bosphorus. They are ours, have been for centuries. So we'll cede away the Middle East, but be able to retain the most strategic points. I already talked about this. England, 1 million soldiers killed in the war, twice as many coming home with life altering disabilities. We're going to see places like Canada, Australia, and New Zealand reconsider what sort of allegiances they owe to the empire and more nationalism. Taxes, which were high during the war, will remain high to try to pay down the war debt, which is sort of a new concept. In the past, one went to war and made money through plunder. Now, these wars of industry are becoming incredibly expensive. In France, they've got to rehabilitate their countryside. They've got to literally dig up all the wire, dig up all the unexploded bombs. They've got to fill in all the craters and trenches and try to make it agricultural again. They've got to try to rebuild their towns. So, rehabilitating France is an enormous venture. Again, Germany, I've already said a lot of this, they write a new socialist sort of constitution, declared a democracy, but it's incredibly fragile. In fact, all of these new countries, Poland is reestablished, Austria is new, Hungary is new. What do we see emerging here? The economies are struggling mightily coming out of the First World War. Everything's destroyed, everything's being parted, separated. Monarchies are going away. The old houses, the old caliphates, everything is ending. And these places are struggling to form new governments. And they're trying out democracies. And the democracies are failing. And the people who don't have food to eat, whose countries are destroyed, are turning to military strongman dictators. Men who will promise them any sense of stability and normalcy, and they will give away any of these new ideas of democracy and liberty and personal rights for normalcy and stability. How long had they even had experience with democracy? only a little bit. They were very angry with the settlement of the First World War. They're unhappy with the results of democratic elections and the governments that they'd elected. They'd only been unified nation states for several years. And they're afraid of Bolshevism because Bolshevism is appealing to the vast base of society. We will take it away from those that have and give it to you. We will upend society. We will put the proletariat in charge. The idea that there are underground movements led by professional revolutionaries attempting to lead the lower classes in a violent overthrow of the establishment. This is a reaction to Bolshevism. Fascism is opposed to Bolshevism, and it is also opposed to the Franco Anglo American classical liberalism. They are afraid of Soviet communism, and they do not see any benefit in classical liberalism. So fascism rises, and they envision a better future through technology, where the corporations support the needs of the state, and where citizens will now self identify as contributing members of that state. So let's get into this. What are characteristics of fascism? Let's talk about this. The 20s and 30s are an era of fascism. Those experts that study fascist societies say these are some of the primary characteristics of a fascist society. The fascist group encourages irrationalism and intuitionism, meaning they encourage members to use or utilize or trust their emotion over their intellect, using phrases like, everybody knows, you know it in your heart, oh, that's something that is common knowledge, instead of actual facts and research. Also, they encourage passion over good manners. The sort of, well, I'm too proper mannered to get into this, um, but encouraging sort of aggressive behavior in general, encouraging profanity and attacks and things like that. Ultra nationalism, not just nationalism. I think I had a quote up there that said, the patriot loves their country for what they do well, but the nationalist loves their country no matter what they do. And that can lead to a dangerous sort of uncritical thinking. Well, ultra nationalism tends to be massive public demonstrations of militarism and ultra patriotism. This is a key facet of fascism, and it's got to be very public and very massive. It is a show, a public celebration of the state and of military might. Organic statism. Now, let's break that down. Organic. This means that it is born into the individual. You are born with this. And statism, you are born to serve the state. Your individual will must be subverted for the will of the state. What comes first? The needs of the state before your needs, because the state is greater than you. It is the state that matters, not you. And you were born to serve it. The cult of the great leader. He is both a military leader and a cultural leader. And the reading you're going to do from Mein Kampf and from Nuremberg speech is going to explain this very clearly. He speaks for the group and through you. He's going to give you the information you need to repeat. And when he's standing up and speaking, even though he can't see you individually, he knows you're there. You are stronger because even though you might be a weak individual and maybe you can't speak as well as the great leader, he can feel you in the audience. I know you're there. And you make everyone stronger by being here with me, and I will speak out for all of us. This is the cult of the great leader. They tend to have highly conservative views on gender. A man is a man, and a woman is a woman, and men do these things, and women do these things. And these sorts of things are taught from childhood on up. There is a very clear distinction on what the family is in a fascist society. Finally, there is a glorification of action and conflict and warfare. The fascist state is self sufficient. We don't need trade. We don't need to interact in economic trade with anyone. We are superior. We are superior peoples. If we can't make it and if we don't have it, then we're going to go conquer other people and we're going to go get it, because youth and warfare and action and violence are virtuous. It is what creates a sharp society. It is what creates a virtuous society. It what makes us glorious. It was what makes us men. Pacifism is absolutely despised. A pacifist must be rooted out of your society so that they do not spread their disease. So let's see if we can see any of that in the rising states in Europe. Either you are with us or you are against us. Mussolini is always right. You must believe, you must obey, you must combat. And if you think back to some of what we learned about Prussian society and the Prussian state, What did Kant say about Frederick the Great? You can do this, you can do that, but in the end, you must obey. They will take over all media, all education, all economics, aspects of your private life. A totalitarian state. Now, who leads? Is it democratic? No. It is a small core of an elite intelligentsia. Where did we first learn that? Isn't that what Lenin prescribed for a communist takeover, for a Bolshevik takeover? And where did we learn about a complete takeover of media and transportation and all of that? Isn't that in the classless society? Wait a minute. Who are these fascists? How are they? What is this? That's a Fasces. It comes from the, well, if you want to be technical, it comes from the Etruscan League, well before the Roman Republic or the Roman Empire. It's a bundle of rods tied together with leather strips. Comes from the classical period. It was carried in Rome as a symbol. Individually, these rods, they might break, but all tied together, representing the various city states of the Etruscan League, they are strong and unbreakable. That's what the Fasces, that's what fascism comes from. That's how Mussolini described it. You individually may be weak, but we together in our fascist movement are incredibly strong and unbreakable. There's no democracy. That's division. There could be no division in a fascist society. There's no freedoms or rights or elections or parties. There's the one party, the fascist party. Wait a minute, that again, that sounds a little like Bolshevism. One party, the Communist Party. It's very interesting. Wait a minute. How is this so very similar? They're anti capitalist too. Yeah, I've already explained that. The state takes it all over. You're in a trade union, the state trade union. There's a lot of racism in fascism. We're not seeing that sort of commitment to equality. They blame the Jews for their loss in the First World War. They believe they're loan sharks, enemies, capitalists, that they stabbed them in the back. They also believe that Jews are Bolsheviks. They point out that Marx was a Jew. And they believe that Bolsheviks and socialists are anarchists and that they seek to overturn society. But that's not what the fascists want to do. They say, hey, look, we can be socialists too. We'll support the workers with the official trade union. But we are not for communism, not Jewish communism, not to completely upturn society. We'll work with the businesses. We're proud of our German heritage here in Germany. We're proud of our Italian heritage here in Italy. We want to make it stronger. We hate our foreign enemies. We think that we are great. We are the most patriotic Germans, the most patriotic Italians, and our enemies are capitulating with the enemy. So even before we take official power, we'll have our own paramilitary groups and march around in parades and show everyone our commitment to action and violence. So we'll have the SS in Germany, the black shirts in Italy. We'll produce our own propaganda. We'll have our own great leaders. Hitler in Germany, Mussolini in Italy, of our own uniforms. And the ruling elite will fund us. They will fund our rise to power. They do not want Bolshevism. But this appeals to the people like Bolshevism. It rallies the people to a common cause, but it does not upturn society. In Germany, Hitler says the German race is the superior race, and our enemies within must be rooted out. And we begin to see Jews, homosexuals, other minorities begin to be removed into ghettos. Now let's keep this within the correct time frame. In the 20s and the 30s, we do not know internationally about the beginnings of the final solution and of the genocide of the Jewish peoples and others until we begin finding the camps at the end of the Second World War. But we do know that these ethnic minorities begin disappearing from German society. We know that. Futurism is an art movement that is part of fascist society that you can see within Europe in this period. Celebrates war as a liberating force, completely rejects tradition in favor of future technology, freeing themselves of the past. Benito Mussolini is asked to define fascism for an Italian dictionary since he coined the phrase. So here are a couple of snippets from his definition. Everything for the state, nothing against the state, no one outside the state. You may no longer be an individual who is not somehow recognized by the state. You have a number, you have a file. The state knows you exist. And if the state knows you exist, you're going to owe something to the state. And you cannot stand against the state. You can't fight City Hall. He says liberalism denied the state in the name of the individual. Classical liberalism said you have your right to life and liberty and happiness and property. Mussolini says fascism reasserts the rights of the state. And that expresses the real essence of the individual. He says, your right to life, liberty, happiness, and property will not bring the best effect or outcome. Your subversion of all of those things to the will of the state will bring the best possible outcome. He had been a school teacher. He had been a socialist. And with the outbreak of the First World War, he had a schism with other socialists because he believed the First World War would bring about the violence necessary to cause political change. He does not get along with his fellow socialists, so he begins writing his own newspaper and developing his ideas of fascism. Throughout the 20s, like everywhere else, Italy's having a very hard time. So he's going to begin to find supporters. He's going to form his movement, march on Rome with thousands of his brown shirts, and King Victor Emmanuel III will hand over power. At first, he's going to follow constitutional rules. He's only going to have 4 fascists in his government. But then his party is going to win elections. And the following year, he'll ban parties, ban unions, ban freedoms, and go after his political opposition. Are we paying attention to this in America? Imagine that you are in a movie theater in 1920s United States. You've got your popcorn there, you're ready to watch a movie, and they show you a newsreel. And it's this.
Performing on the biggest stage in the world was just one step in my journey. Hi, I'm Ronnie.
Your ears, as well as your eyes, the current events of the world.
I am very glad to be able to express my friendly feelings towards the American nation. Friendship with which Italy looks at the millions of citizens who from Alaska to Florida, from the Pacific to the Atlantic, live in the United States, is today deeply rooted in our hearts. This feeling, created by mutual interests, so contributed to the preparation of an ever brighter era in the life of both nations. I grieve the wonderful energy of the American people, and I see and recognize among you sons of your land as well as ours, my fellow citizens, who are working to make America great. I salute the great American people. I salute the Italians of America, who unite in a single love our two nations.
Okay, so what did we see there? We saw Mussolini walk out in his riding pants, and to me, he sounds like a vampire. I'm not trying to be cruel or stereotypical, but he's very difficult for me to understand. But what does he say? He talks about America from Alaska to Florida, from Atlantic to Pacific, and excuse me, and how much he wants cooperation between the two nations, and how Italians living in America and in Italy love two countries. And then some little girls sang. He doesn't seem to be very threatening, does he? So, internationally in 1929, it's like, okay, so this is the new guy leading Italy. Doesn't seem to be too much. In hindsight, things are really quite different, you know, and that's the I don't know what word I'm looking for. It's a positive aspect of history, that we can look at it from from hindsight. It's very difficult living in the moment to know just exactly what's going on, until the moment is past, because so many perspectives and viewpoints get thrown around on the news and on the internet. And it's very difficult to be able to tell just exactly what's happening until the moment has time for some thought, you know. For example, words and actions are different things. Politicians can say a lot of things, so much so that it's a cacophony, and you don't know which one, what of what they say do they mean and what they don't. Well, let's take a guy like Adolf Hitler, for example, who says the personification of the devil as the symbol of all evil assumes the living shape of the Jew. He says things like this so often you can't but take him seriously. Okay? This is his harping point. This is his scapegoat. He believed, as a soldier fighting on the field in the First World War, much like many Germans, that they had not lost that war. And he blames broadly Jewish peoples in German society for capitulating and ending the war for financial reasons. And that is his testimony to the German people. And he tells the German people how wonderful they are and how they are going to crawl out of the situation that they are in, and how he can lead them to absolute world greatness and domination. German business leaders will increasingly support him and his ardently anti communist National Socialist movement. So, yes, if you've never heard any of this before, he was born in Austria, had a difficult childhood, loved painting, wanted to be in the Fine Art School of Austria. He will move to Munich in southeastern Germany. He will fight First World War, all of that. He does not found the Nazi Party, but he will become enrolled in it. And it is in southeast Germany where the Nazis have their real heartland of activity, and they will begin marching on and moving much of the rest. There is rampant, as I said, hyperinflation and problems within Germany. And then in 1929, when Wall Street collapses, we see a massive worldwide dip in the economy. And by 1932, there are 6 million unemployed. As you see, throughout the 20s, the Nazis are having their movement, having their growth. In Munich, you see Hitler attempt an early sort of takeover. They have their earliest movements in beer halls where business leaders will just buy beer for working people if they'll just sit and listen to Hitler. And in 1923, they feel like they have enough of a following that they march in the streets in Munich and have riots and fights trying to go to Berlin. Well, Hitler goes to prison and is sentenced to 5 years. He'll only be in for 9 months, but while in jail, he'll write, and this is misspelled, it's Mein, Mein Kampf, meaning my struggle, and publishes it, and it's read all over Germany, and he becomes a hero. And he will, from that moment on, move towards politics and not street fighting. By 1928, you will see the Nazis get 12 seats in the Reichstag, which is the new parliament. By 1930, they get 107 seats. Are the communists a true threat? Yes, they've gotten 77 seats. So he can legitimately point to a Bolshevik threat in his country. 2 years later, they are the majority, but not an overall one. Hindenburg, if you'll remember from the First World War, was General Hindenburg. He's the chancellor. He's going to offer Hitler charge of the government. Once in power, there will be a fire. The Reichstag will be in flames. Hitler will blame the Communist Party, say this was an arson attack. They'll win the elections, and they will vote special powers to Hitler, emergency powers. He will never give them up, and he will be a dictator from that point on. So, everything that we talked about, totalitarian state, personal dictatorship, no more political parties, just the Nazi Party, suppression of personal rights and freedoms. Who's he go after first? He goes after the members within his own party that were not completely loyal. The night of the long knives, goes after politicians and Nazis that he didn't think he could trust and has them killed. We see a decrease in unemployment. Yes, it says kept capitalism. What this means is all the business leaders, all the businesses, they're going to still make money. I'll show you here in just a minute the big differences between this and Bolshevism. So, once he takes control, he begins his social programs. He begins rearming. He begins building his army and navy and his air force. And he goes back and starts annexing things and rearms the Rhineland. Annexes Austria. Well, if you're an American sitting in a movie theater with your popcorn, and you were watching a newsreel, and they said, hey, here's the new guy leading Germany, what would you think?
We know that finding high-quality foods you can trust can be challenging. That's why Go Macro is making
meine Arbeitsmänner. Wenn ich euch so sehe, dann wird es mir schwer zu sprechen. Uns allen geht das Herz über, vor Freude über euch. Ihr wisst gar nicht, wie das deutsche Volk euch lieb gewonnen hat. Kleinen Ausschnitt ergibt uns, dass uns die Herzen so übervoll werden lässt. Das ist die Fanfare eines neuen Deutschlands, das sie hier ankündigt. Der Spaten ist ein Symbol einer neuen Gemeinschaft geworden. Und so erneuern wir denn auch jedes Jahr wieder diesen alten Schwur der gegenseitigen Treue, der Kameradschaft, dieses alte gemeinsame Bekenntnis zu unserer herrlichen Bewegung und damit zu unserem ewigen deutschen Volk. Deutschland, Sieg, Heil! Heil!
And there is very little likelihood of a negative answer.
Vertrauen und ihr habt das Glück, Zeugen einer ebenso bewegten wie großen Zeit zu sein. Der Beste mit gespreizten Beinen auf dieser Erde, der gewandt ist, gesund ist an Leib und deshalb auch gesund an seiner Seele. Und so wächst neben euch Junges heran, das deutsche Mädchen. Vielleicht
Well, what did we see there? If you were in a movie theater and you saw that, and again, this is before the war, what might you think of him? What might you think of the crowds of adoring people and how organized they are and the vast display of patriotism? Again, you're not at war with him. They're just showing you what's happening in Germany. And you don't know all of the details that I just told you. Some might say, my goodness, but that guy's got all those people marching in order and in line. It's like Germany's got things turned around. It's what a lot of people in the world were thinking. They didn't know all the details. Well, let's talk about the Soviet Union in the interwar period. Lenin said before he died, after his strokes, don't give control to to Stalin. Of all the possible people that we're discussing, not him. Why? Stalin's not his name. Like Lenin, who took this name from the Lena River where he was exiled in Siberia. Stalin literally means man of steel. This man is not ethnically Russian. He's from Georgia, not in the United States, but in the Caucasus region of the Russian Empire. He was not what you'd call a dyed in the wool Bolshevik. He was good at stealing and kidnapping and robbing and helping fund the Bolshevik Party. And when they took power and Lenin was giving out jobs, he got the job of general secretary of the party, which was not an important gig. But what it entailed was giving out other jobs, which made him slightly important in something he was very good at, which is interpersonal politics. Being a criminal, he was good at knowing who to keep close and who to keep far away, when to trade favors, and who to eliminate and when to eliminate them. So when the time came, he called in the favors and he takes control. He is not like Lenin. He is not like Marx. His interpretation of what he takes over is socialism in one country. He is not interested in funding revolutions overseas. This is something that the West does not understand. The West is so afraid of what Lenin has done that they are simply terrified by the idea of international revolution. Stalin is not like them. He wants to keep his money in the Soviet Union. He's not funding this. He will implement the 5-year plans. He's taking complete control of production. The Soviets aren't in control, meaning the communal councils. He's taking control. He's taking complete control of everything. He is a totalitarian dictator. Here's a quote from him. The easiest way to gain control of the population is to carry out acts of terror. Where are we? We are in Russia. This is not dissimilar to the rule of the Tsar. He too, with the emerging 20th century technologies of film and radio, will too use the cult of personality and create a cult to Joseph Stalin as the great leader of the Soviet Union. And he will position himself next to Lenin and use the legacy of Lenin to bolster himself as Lenin's chosen successor, even though he was not. He will institute a police state using something called the NKVD, and I can't remember off the top of my head what all that stands for. It will become the KGB, not dissimilar to the secret police of the Tsar. You understand? He is terrified of another war. knowing how ill equipped they were for the First World War. And he is desperately trying to industrialize the Soviet Union to create an industrial army that can fight in that war. He's trying to sell agricultural surpluses from the Ukraine on the international market so he can use the profits to build up his industry. He's also going to purge anyone who stands against him, especially within his own party. By doing so, he's going to wipe out almost all of the original Bolsheviks who would stand against him. Let's watch this video about what he does in the Ukraine.
In the early 1930s, millions of Ukraine's people died in a devastating famine. Known as the Holodomor, it is one of the most tragic chapters in Ukrainian history. When Ukraine became a part of the Soviet Union in 1922, it was the country's breadbasket, thanks to its fertile fields of wheat. In 1928, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin introduced collectivization, which was supposed to unite privately owned farms into state collective farms called kolkhoz. The Soviet leadership argued that collective farms would be more effective and produce a surplus, which would feed industrial workers. As many Ukrainian peasants were not willing to hand over their land to the state, their fields were confiscated. Many of them were sent into exile or abandoned their homes. In 1932, the government's quota on crops was raised significantly, and farmers were expected to harvest more than before. For many, it was a target that was impossible to meet. What grain they produced was confiscated with nothing left for them or their families. Farmers who hoarded their crops were often punished or executed. The exact number of people who died in the famine of 1932 and 1933 is still not known. Historians estimate that between 3 and 12 million people perished, most of them ethnic Ukrainians. For decades, the existence of the famine was denied by the Soviet Union. Historians in Russia and the West disagree as to whether the famine was man-made and if it was a deliberate attempt to eradicate Ukrainian independence. Since 2006, Ukraine and 15 other countries have recognized the Holodomor as a genocide against the Ukrainian people.
So, we will see that repeat in our class. Countries that have yet to industrialize will sell agricultural goods unto starvation in order to industrialize. We see it happen there in the Soviet Union under Stalin. We'll see it happen again in China under Mao. What we will see in Spain is a precursor to the Second World War. A civil war will break out against fascists and those that will be more loyal to a monarchy. The Russians, the Soviets, as well as the Germans will send supplies and troops to fight on either side. We'll see communists, we'll see nationalists, we'll see fascists, all fighting and testing out new weaponry. In the end, the fascists win, and Francisco Franco will rule till 1975. One of the great works of art of the 20th century will come from this. In the Basque region of Spain, in the mountains, the Basques have had a culture all their own, going all the way back to The Indo-Aryan migrations, the Basque language has not been affected by the rest of the European language group, which tells us that they've lived there prior to some of the earliest human migrations. This is one of the oldest cultural groups on earth, the Basques. One of their villages was dive bombed by German pilots and German planes that were fighting in this war on the side of the fascists. And Pablo Picasso will produce the famous Guernica as a symbol of the violence unleashed on villagers, village people living in mountains by the fascist war machine. Then in 1939, on the eve of the Second World War, we'll see a very strange thing. The Nazis and the communists, the Soviets, sign a treaty, a non aggression pact. It says that they will not go to war with one another for at least 10 years. And if either one of them goes to war with Poland, they'll split it between them, erasing Poland again and giving each half, and they'll trade with one another. What a strange thing. Because the Nazis are ardent anti Bolsheviks, making Bolsheviks and Nazis natural enemies. They're going to sign this treaty. What strange bedfellows. Stalin is hoping to buy time. He knows his army's not ready. Hitler hopes that he can invade Poland and deal with whatever the English response is without the Soviets causing him trouble on an eastern front. They will end up invading the Soviet Union in 1941. It buys about 2 years. Which brings me to this. All this that we've talked about, all this fascism in Germany and Italy, and Stalin and what he's doing in the Soviet Union. Well, what's the difference? How can we call one thing and the other thing? I know, I know. It all looks the same, doesn't it? Well, what's the same and what's different? They both have a totalitarian cult of the great leader. They both persecute Jews and other minorities. Stalin is a persecutor of Jews. He is not like Lenin. He will persecute Jews and other minorities. They both will have highly conservative gender roles. Where are they different? In fascism, there is private property. You own your house. You own your car. You earn a wage. The businesses are still owned as corporations. There are small businesses. There is that sort of internal capitalism. In Stalinism, the state owns the means of production and it plans the economy. It owns all of that. It's 5 year plans. In fascism, they serve the state. They'll collude with the state, but they make profits. There's war profiteering. Okay? There's private property. Further, like I said, the citizens own their houses, but they are in complete service to the state. If the state says you're in the army, you're in the army. If the state says you work at this factory, you work at this factory. You know, if the state says you're a stay at home mom, you're a stay at home mom. but you earn a wage, you own your house. In Stalinism, you don't own your house, you live on communal property. The state owns that property, and you get social services. You understand? There aren't small businesses, everything's a service. Fascism is militaristic and it is expansionist. We will expand our state through violence to acquire those things that we need. Stalinism, we are not international. We are not revolutionary. We don't want to spend money inspiring communist revolutions in other countries. We need to focus on our own problems. We'll be an example for other workers, but we're not going to spend a lot of money and time trying to spread the revolution. In Asia, the Japanese are going to continue to spread into Manchuria and take all of Germany's territories. The very young child that the Dowager Empress Shiji was ruling for will rule for a very short time, be in a Soviet prison after the Second World War. What we'll see is Sun Yat sen, who will found the Nationalist Party. He will overthrow the last of the Qing and claim to establish a Chinese republic. But there is no way that he can actually legitimately rule all of China. There is too much chaos. In fact, Japan in 1915 says in their 21 demands that they should be the protectorate of China and should step in and rule it, that they now are the big brother. After the First World One, after World War One, they nationalists say you must abolish this extraterritoriality and all of these concessions. You foreigners need to leave and must live under Chinese authority. We will not sign the Treaty of Versailles. Sun Yat-sen will die, but prior to it, he's going to publish a book. He says this is what the future of China should be: democracy, nationalism, and livelihood. One, we need to deliver sovereignty to the people. Principle of John Locke. The people are sovereign, not an emperor, but the people. We must commit ourselves to a democratic government. Second, nationalism. Come together and recognize that we all have things in common. Find a way to establish a Chinese identity so that we can end our exploitation, end the regionalism, so that you can come together and end our foreign exploitation. And finally, land reform, industrialization, social welfare. We've got to commit to the future. Break up the land, give it to the peasants, industrialize. The people with the money, break up the land and put your money into industry. Well, who is in this party? This nationalist party, people who want to move forward in China. It is the wealthy, it is the business people, it is those who are working towards becoming bureaucrats and politicians, And it is also the left wing, your intellectuals, radicals, young people, and those committed to Marxism. Sun Yat sen will die, and in will come a more military minded man named Chiang Kai shek. There will be a movement, and we'll talk about this more in a future lecture, a great split where the communists will be expelled. It's very violent, the Shanghai Massacre. And they will move the capital south to Nanking and begin a war against the regional holders of power. Again, we will talk about this in much more detail moving forward, but we'll see the communists break away, take a long retreat, but when the Japanese invade, we'll talk more. All right, I feel like I talked forever, and I'm done talking. Thank you all very much, and I will talk to you all later.